Our job as the top leader in our firms is to shape the culture because culture is senior to everything. You get the culture right, you have a chance to win financially. You can't win financially and get the culture wrong. That culture will eventually catch up and you will lose, or at least you will highly underperform if your culture is bad. Well, hello and welcome to the J. Sterling Hughes Show, where we share how we have built our family law practice from 0 to 25 attorneys and 15 million in revenue, all in the past 10 years. And my purpose here is to document what's working and what's not working with hopes that you can take that and you can recontextualize it and shorten your success curve. My name is Jeff Hughes and I'm your host. Today we're talking about toxic law firm cultures. So one of my biggest failings in this area came when I promoted a leader in our firm. And really, as I look back on that, I could see these warning signs, and I did the promotion against my better judgment because I could see all of these wonderful qualities that existed in this leader. She was wicked smart, very good at lawyering, great skills in that area, had really good business sense about her and magnetic personality. And I took those attributes and I thought, my goodness, she's helped other people on a limited basis be successful. Let's elevate her and give her more authority to do that. But I could see and I could hear little bubblings of warning signs and problems. I could witness a few of them. In my experience with her, there was a deep level of insecurity that bubbled up and came out in some very negative, destructive ways. And frankly, I just ignored those things and looked past them. So she moved into a position of leadership and things went from bad to worse. And despite whatever we did, nothing could seem to work. And there were warning signs and feedback throughout the entire firm within a pretty short period of time of problems that were going on. And so what had happened is that our culture had eroded in a very, very quick way once she was moved into this position of leadership. And months went by and I allowed it to happen. Despite the warning signs, because I was so enamored with all of these high performing qualities that I thought we could just simply blow past and maybe we could work around these cultural issues that had occurred. And once she left, it just came out of the woodwork like cockroaches, like turning on the light or something. So many issues bubbled up that we were able to hear about and begin to address. And we did that. And it took us about 1.5 years to kind of work through all of that toxicity that had built up in the culture. Now, I point this out because I didn't create personally that toxicity in our culture. But me as the leader of the firm, the CEO of the firm, it was 100% my fault because I allowed it to happen. And you can have a culture go from high performing, everything is smooth and working great, to toxic culture in a very short period of time if you're not careful. So in this show today, I want to talk about what is a toxic firm culture? What are some consequences of having that culture, and what are some benefits of having a positive, engaging, collaborative culture, and how do we deal with it when we do have that toxic firm culture? So what is a toxic firm culture? Well, first off, we need to understand and recognize that culture exists, whether it's designed intentionally or allowed to evolve. It's there. You cannot avoid a culture being. The minute you have two people together, you now have a culture. And the bigger that team gets, the more that culture can be so much more difficult to change, to shift in a positive way if it's going negative. And you as the leader, it's your job. It's the top leader's job to shape and to build that culture. When the culture is negative, when it's going wrong, it's 100% of the time the leader's fault. Either they're doing it, they're promoting that negative culture, that toxic culture, or they're allowing it to happen. Our job as the top leader in our firms is to shape the culture because culture is senior to everything. You get the culture right, you have a chance to win financially. You can't win financially and get the culture wrong. That culture will eventually catch up and you will lose, or at least you will highly underperform if your culture is bad. You might be thinking, well, Jeff, that's a really harsh way to describe it. It's not always my fault. And sometimes when we think of toxic cultures and we think of cultures that we maybe have experienced in the past, we think of usually like those big marquee negative culture experiences like the harassment or the bullying, the shouting and yelling. But that actually happens in a small number of cultures and a small number of firms. Really, the toxicity that I'm talking to can be very subtle. And it can creep in slowly, almost unnoticed. And it could be the manager being somewhat negative and ridiculing and putting down other employees in subtle kind of like quiet ways. You know how we can do that as humans, right? We can like subtly send signals, and that can contribute to the toxic culture. It can be exclusion from conversations. It can be not being on the in crowd and not being told of things and not being a part of the team. It could be certainly these quiet little negative comments and derogatory remarks and all those offhanded, quote, sarcastic, kind of not really intentional but yet intentional sort of ways that things can occur. So when you have this type of toxic firm culture, when it exists, there are some dire consequences that you will pay for having that. What I have found is that teammates, first off, they start to hide. They're not around. They're not volunteering for things. They're not engaged with the firm. They're simply just hiding. There's an increased level of anxiety and this lack of psychological safety around sharing what they're seeing and giving good feedback and talking about things that they need. Those are all parts of how teammates hide when they're afraid of what the blowback on them is going to look like. Worst case is they disengage from work altogether and they quit, right? Or they just disengage from work and they don't quit. That's also pretty bad. What you find is that you have a higher burnout level, you have a higher turnover level with teammates whenever that firm culture is toxic. Conversely, flip that around. Whenever it's positive, you have certainly higher job satisfaction. Teammates feel that they matter, like they're a part of something. They have community, they have purpose. You could have all of that there, but you could have really toxic relationships and it could all like be covered by that. You have more productivity, meaning you make more money, meaning you have more efficiency within the firm. Clients are getting served in better ways. You have more collaboration, working together. You certainly have lower turnover in those cases. You're not motivating people to go out the door because they don't like the toxic culture that's going on. All good stuff ensues when you get that culture positive, you get it right, and you kind of eliminate that toxicity that happens. So how do you deal with firm toxic cultures? So I have dealt with this obviously off and on over the years as our culture has kind of ebbed and flowed. And naturally, it starts with the leaders. If your firm culture is toxic, go look in the mirror and start with yourself first. Are you the one contributing to that? Are you the one that's propelling this toxicity? Or are you the one that's allowing it to happen? Generally, it's going to require you to fire someone. That's generally the thing that you're going to have to do to turn that around. There's someone in your culture, if it's not you, fire yourself if it's you, okay? But if it's not you and you're assured of that and you're looking at it objectively, okay, then there's probably someone in your culture, in your team that's doing it the most, who's just the worst offender. Fire that person right away, my view. Generally, that's one of the best ways to handle it. Then you have an all hands on deck, start over, kind of a do-over, and that's your time to explain, hey, look, we're gonna have a culture that's no longer gonna be XYZ. We're going to point our culture toward ABC, and we're going to do everything we can to get there. This is what we're aiming for. So starting today, this is the set of expectations. In that conversation, I have found that it helps and it's more effective for you as a leader to fully own it. Own it in detail. Own it with like raw description of where you went wrong. Don't blame. Don't blame this person that you just fired, because it's your fault as a leader. You hired them probably. You allowed them to do their bad stuff, even though you probably heard about it and maybe you even participated in it, but own it all. Confess, all that sort of stuff. Once you confess, people will give you a second chance, but you got to confess, no blaming. Don't point the finger at anyone else. Own it all right? Then talk about never waste a crisis. This is your crisis. Talk about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in detail. What behaviors are acceptable? What behaviors are not acceptable? And then if you have a process that you need to implement to fix this, if it's processable, for example, with something you can build a process around, maybe it's one-on-ones, maybe it's more check-ins, whatever needs to happen around there, do that. That's received well. If teammates are getting one-on-one feedback time and they feel like they can trust you, right? Trust the process, trust what you're doing there, then you're gonna be able to work through that pretty quickly. I remember one time we used Slack as one of our means of communication internally at the firm. And we had these teammates like set up a separate kind of private Slack channel. And they were using that channel to be really mean and critical and bullying of their boss. And somehow we found out about this. I can't remember how it came up, but we found out about it. And there were 3 teammates in there, and 2 of them were like the biggest offenders of them all. And so we fired both of them. And talked about how we're not going to allow and tolerate stuff like that. And boy, word got around really quick as to what we valued in our practice and what we were not going to allow. That was a great moment for us to, quote, never waste a crisis and reinforce our values. And then at the end of it, you as the leader, it's imperative on you to follow through with the right, consistent leadership behavior. And that's loving your entire team, not playing favorites, not being critical of others, not engaging in those conversations that lead to toxic cultures being established, and establish an absolute zero tolerance policy on toxic behavior in all of its many forms. But you have to live that out first. You've got to be the one to show and model the way before you can expect your team to do that. I found if you do these things, you have a chance to build a wonderful culture. And if you have a wonderful culture, great things ensues. Culture is senior to everything else. It's senior to strategy. It's senior to all the business processes that you have, is having a good culture. So start there, get that right. If you get that right, you have a chance. A lot of great things can happen from there. Thank you, and hope you have a great week. Hope that's helpful to you as you build your practice.